First day of spring practice is in the books for the Texas Longhorns football team. And on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we discuss everything that caught my eye from day one.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, everything from day one of spring practices that caught my eye, from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball to some of the best quotes from our forever head coach, Steve Sarkisian, in his first spring practice press conference. And then in the third segment, or at the end of the show, the Texas baseball team was down to Air Force 5-3 in the bottom of the ninth inning and somehow ended up walking it off in the bottom of the 10th. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, speaking of baseball, all right, I'm super wired up right now. I set an alarm. I'm such a sicko to wake up at 5 a.m. to watch the Dodgers and Padres play in Korea in the official first game of the MLB season. Of course, your Texas Rangers, right, won the World Series. And so they have the official opening day game next Thursday at home against the Cubs. But, you know, MLB is expanding or trying to expand. I get it. So they're playing two games in Korea. The first one was at 5 a.m. Central Time today. The second one is at 5 a.m. Central Time tomorrow. Dodgers won 5-2 this morning. Got, I think, like 3 runs or 4 runs in the 8th inning. So that was a really good game at the end, and really excited for baseball season for sure. And I know you don't really care about the Dodgers or Padres. I'm the sicko that woke up at 5 a.m. to watch them, so I just had to get that out. Right now, we're talking about the Texas Longhorns football team, and I'm even more excited, right, that it's spring practice time. And before you know it, we'll be in DKR on August 31st playing against Colorado State, celebrating our favorite football team, right? And when you look at it, I said a million times, I say it all the time, that, you know, the offseason is when you start to really build that foundation of a championship team, right? Championship teams aren't built during the season, right? You don't find your championship medal, right, throughout the season. It starts in the offseason. And we know with winter conditioning, Coach Beck does such a great job in terms of getting our players mentally and physically ready for the grind of the offseason and the grind of what is now the regular season and the playoffs in college football. But then spring practice is where you start to, you know, really solidify that foundation that started with winter conditioning. And you really start to incorporate who you want to be as a football team and who will be the guys, you know, for you when it, you know, when the pads really start to pop, you know, in August moving forward into January. So yesterday was the first day of spring practice, and yesterday was the first day of solidifying that championship foundation for the Texas Longhorns football team. So over the next, you know, 2 segments, offensive updates, defensive updates that caught my eye, and then some of the best quotes from Steve Sarkisian in his initial spring practice press conference, starting with Quinn Ewers, starting with the quarterback position, the most important position on the field. You know, this is a big year for Quinn Ewers in terms of, you know, trying to lead Texas to, you know, where they haven't been in a long time, to a national championship, trying to lead Texas to possibly a SEC championship in their first year in the conference, and, you know, trying to prove to NFL evaluators that he indeed can be a franchise quarterback and can change the fortunes of a franchise in the National Football League. And one of the more notable things from day one of spring practice was it was reported how lean Quinn Ewers looked, even with adding the extra muscle to his frame. And he's made such a remarkable change to his body since arriving on campus early in 2022. I remember he just had the mullet, didn't even look clean, looked out of shape, you know, and just 2 years later, he really looks like an athlete at that quarterback position. And 2 years later, he has proven he is an athlete at that quarterback position, being able to take off and make plays with his legs. And that's all possible, you know, because of the changes he's made to his body, right? The work he's put in on his body, the discipline to stop eating things like Chick-fil-A. This is a direct quote from him, that were, you know, having adverse effects on his body. So shout out to Quinn Ewers for, you know, making that change, you know, towards his frame. And it's really benefited him, you know, at the University of Texas. And hopefully it continues to benefit him going into the season. There was mention of him throwing really good deep balls at the end of the viewing window, one specifically to Isaiah Bond. The clip of that one is floating around on Twitter. It's one of the big steps NFL evaluators want to see him take, right? Coming into the University of Texas in 2022, we thought that, with Quinn Ewers coming over with his arm talent and his arm strength and his ability to drop the ball in the bucket, that the deep ball would be a huge part of our offense at the University of Texas while Quinn Ewers was here. And we still throw the deep ball a lot, right? A good amount, but we haven't been as consistent or successful as we thought we would be over the last 2 years with Quinn Ewers. Also, NFL evaluators are looking for Quinn Ewers to take a big jump in terms of completing and being more efficient with those deep balls this season as well. So, obviously it's the first day of spring practice. Obviously they're in shorts and they're not being guarded by anybody. It's routes on air, but it is really good, as reported by the media, that at the end of the viewing window, he looked really crisp and precise on those deep balls. And we're going to need that throughout the season if Texas wants to be a championship team. Also, there looks to be a potential change in terms of how coaches are able to communicate with their players in game that could start this season. We're used to, the big goofy signs, on the sidelines and, coaches having to communicate to the players, specifically the quarterback, non-verbally, right? But that's not how things are done in the National Football League. And I'm always a big believer that if you want to get these players in college prepared for the National Football League, then you need to do the things in the National Football League. Then you need to do the things in college that they do in the National Football League, And so now it looks like we're moving towards that direct helmet to coach, communication that they have in the NFL. And even though it hasn't been approved yet, right, it's likely to be approved, but even though it hasn't been approved and won't be until likely April or May, Steve Sarkisian on the first day of practice has already implemented that direct communication between the head coach and the quarterback, which I think will be huge for this Texas offense this year. One, it helps prevent sign stealing, right? If the coach is talking directly to the quarterback in his helmet, it'll improve the communication between the two in game, talking verbally instead of reading nonverbal signs. And it'll allow Sark to provide more info than he would have been able to nonverbally, right? Before it's just like, here's the signs, here's the play. But now that he's talking directly to him, he can say, hey, watch out for the mic. This may be a blitz. Watch the safety on the left side, anything like that. Like any additional information he can give Quinn Ewers can benefit this offense so much. So right now it hasn't been approved, right? But it's a good thing that they're working on it, getting it crisp now. So when it's ultimately improved in April, hopefully, cross our fingers, knock on wood, right? Texas should be right, ready to take that huge step in terms of being one of the teams that's better equipped, right, to transition into that direct communication between head coach and quarterback, because they're already practicing it on day one before it's even approved. Moving on to the running back position, on yesterday's episode, I posed the question of who would be the new leaders on this Texas football team in 2024. And surprisingly, Jaden Blue was mentioned as one of those guys by Steve Sarkisian. And it's not surprising in terms of I didn't think he could be a leader, right? I just didn't see him stepping up and being one of those guys on this football team. And he's the veteran of the room. He's the oldest one in the room right now. I know him and Savion Red came on campus at the same time, but Savion Red started as a wide receiver. He's just one of the more experienced players on the team, right? Being a junior at this point. So he's a really good running back. To my eye, I think he's the best running back on the team right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he forces the coaches to put him in the running back one role at some point in the season. I think Cedric Baxter is a better fit in the offense, but I think Jaden Blue right now is just a better player. So it's good to see him being a leader, right, on this Texas football team, because I think outside of that, like actually on the football field, he'll be one of the best players in the country this season. Sticking with the running back position, talking about two true freshmen, Jared Gibson is already 211 pounds and has a frame that can easily carry 225 plus pounds. If you look at him, I mean, as a true freshman, as a 19-year-old, he's a first off the bus type guy. I mean, he looks stacked, right? And he reminds me a lot of Josh Jacobs at Alabama. There's not a lot of shaking. There's not a lot of make you miss, to his game, but he's just productive. Right. And you look up, he's going to have 1,300 yards, and you do not want to get him, it's going to be damn near impossible to get him on the ground, I should say. You do not want to tackle him. Like, you just look at one picture of Jared Gibson and be like, how do I get him to the ground? Right. And if you give him 20 carries, he's the type of running back that gets stronger with each one. Right. And he's just going to wear the defense down. So love Jared Gibson. Like I said, he reminds me a lot of Josh Jacobs, and I think he'll be that player for us eventually at the 40 acres. Christian Clark was mentioned as having exceptional hands. And the tape showed how versatile he was and how he was severely underranked. Some sites had him as the 230th best player in the country. You go watch 3 highlights of Christian Clark and tell that is not the truth, right? And because he's from Arizona, a lot of people have compared him to Bijan Robinson. I want to slow down on that one, right? Because Bijan Robinson is an all-world running back. But I definitely think Christian Clark will be a very good running back at the 40 acres. And he's somebody that can do a little bit of everything in a very explosive offense under Steve Sarkisian. Moving on to the wide receiver position, Jonte Cook was described as looking like an alpha out there. And with his added size and route running ability, he's poised for a huge season in this offense. I said yesterday that the assumption will be that Isaiah Bond is the number one wide receiver in this offense, and he very well may be, right? But I think Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore and Matthew Golden will have something to say about that as well. These players are hungry, they're competing, and they all want that number one spot. Now, right now, I think it's wide open because you have so much talent in that room. Isaiah Bond played over 60% of his snaps in the slot at Alabama, but he's going to play a lot more outside, a la that Xavier Worthy role. So he was a slot receiver essentially at Alabama. He's going to be playing on outside once again in that Xavier Worthy role at the University of Texas. At least on day one, speaking of the slot, DeAndre Moore was with the first group in the slot and has been described as the best route runner on the team, right? I remember in high school, he was at a camp before he even came to the University of Texas, and there's like a route that's burned into my head. It's one of the craziest routes I've ever seen from DeAndre Moore. So I can definitely believe that he might be the best route runner on the team, although I do like the way Jonte Cook runs routes as well. His work ethic was also praised, which isn't a surprise at all. If you follow DeAndre Moore, it'll be interesting to see how that spot in the slot unfolds once Silas Bolden arrives on campus in May. And then Matthew Golden looked impressive at the wide receiver position, also sharing return duties, kick and punt return duties with Isaiah Bond and Jonte Cook. And that's going to be a huge position to figure out in terms of special teams because you lost two really good returners in Keelan Robinson and Xavier Worthy. Moving on to the offensive line. Kelvin Banks, one of the best left tackles in the country. I think a top 10, top 15 pick in the 2025 draft easily next year. He looks leaner, according to reports, while maintaining his strength at the point of attack. This should also help his already exceptional movement skills and help him stay in front of the most athletic edges we've ever seen, right? We got players like Colin Simmons, and all these players that are running 4.4s at the edge position, weighing 240, 250 pounds, right? It's just crazy. So Kelvin Banks has been able to do a really good job neutralizing them the first 2 years, and this might be his best season yet at the 40 acres heading into the 2025 NFL draft. And yesterday on the podcast, I said that I think right now, while you have a player like Kelvin Banks, Texas should identify who will be, their starting left tackle next year, or who is their left tackle in waiting. And I mentioned players like Peyton Kirkland and Brandon Baker that could possibly step in that role. But one player I did not mention, who was mentioned as having a great first day of practice and looks like he will really be a guy on this football team, is Trevor Goosby, right? People were raving about Trevor Goosby first day, just his athleticism, his body, his frame, and what he's able to do, in terms of actually being an offensive lineman. And he's a prime candidate to be a swing tackle this year if he needs to step in for somebody, knocking on wood for health for this Texas football team. And he looks like he's definitely a strong candidate to be a starter either on the left or right side going into 2025. So those are the offensive updates that intrigued me from yesterday. Obviously, it's the first day of spring practice. It's not a lot to take from it, but it's the Texas Longhorns football team and the spring practices, so I'm going to take a lot from it, right? Quick word from our sponsors, and we get into the defensive updates and then some of my favorite quotes from Steve Sarkisian on day one. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. I want to give a quick shout out to Colorado State yesterday, who made Virginia just look abysmal, especially on offense. I think they had 14 points in the first half and didn't score the last 9 minutes of the first half. And so now they'll be playing the Texas Longhorns in the first round in Charlotte, North Carolina. So shout out to the Colorado State team, solidifying everybody's opinion that Virginia should not have been in the tournament in the first place. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, getting into some updates on the defensive side of the ball. In terms of defensive tackle, Vernon Broughton looks like the nose tackle at this point, with Alfred Collins starting next to him at defensive tackle. Also, Alfred Collins being listed as 321 pounds is crazy. but I'm intrigued, right? The keys going into next season will be Vernon Broughton's ability to hold up against the run and then Alfred Collins' overall consistency. And you lost Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat, who gave you one of the best run defenses in the country and were nothing but consistent throughout the entire season, right? So we knew there was going to be a drop-off going to, Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins. There's no disrespect to them. It's just all the credit in the world to Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. But I do think that Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy's superpowers are essentially what might be lacking right now with Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins heading into the SEC. In terms of the edge position, this wasn't from the first day of practice necessarily, but Trey Moore in just 2 months says he feels more explosive and stronger under Coach Beck, more explosive and stronger than the Trey Moore last season that had 14 sacks and the Trey Moore that had 22 and a half sacks over the last 2 years. Could be in for a monster season at the edge position at the 40 acres. Jalen Gilbo was also somebody who was mentioned as stepping up into a leadership role, and on the field, his ability to play star at a high level will allow so much versatility amongst the cornerback room and how Jahdae Barron is used, right? If you have Jalen Gilbo who can really hold down that star spot, now you have a player in Jahdae Barron that you can move around from the inside to the outside and really have versatility on how you deploy your cornerbacks, right? Terrence Brooks gained 10 pounds. He was already a first off the bus type guy, especially at the DB position, but he gained 10 pounds from last season and was mentioned as having a really good first day. So I think it's going to be interesting in terms of your top 4 corners. Obviously they're going to rotate, but who are the first 3 guys on the field, right? Between Jalen Gilbo, Jahdae Barron, Terrence Brooks, and Malik Muhammad. I think that's going to be interesting. Physically at safety, just from looking at pictures, I wasn't there, obviously. Xavier Filsami and Andrew Makuba look really, really good, right? So that's my short list of defensive updates. Obviously, when the media is only there for 20 minutes for a viewing window, it's hard to get, great defensive updates or anything substantial, but those were the things that caught my eye from day one. Now, I want to read and react to some of my favorite quotes from Steve Sarkisian's initial spring practice press conference yesterday. The first thing I'm reacting to is a quote where he says, I don't know necessarily if we have just one dominant voice on this team. I don't know if we have Roschon Johnson as an example, but I do think we have more positive quality voices on this team. I think our leadership is now more all-encompassing, and that's what you like. I think this is huge, right? Like he said, there is no Roschon Johnson. There is no definitive leader. There is no definitive guy that we're going to follow behind and we say he's the guy that's going to set the tone every week, right? But when you have a very talented football team, somebody has to step up. And we've talked about Quinn Ewers, Kelvin Banks, now Jalen Gilbo, now Jahdae Barron, or not now Jahdae Barron, but Jahdae Barron, now Jaden Blue, right? Everybody's name starts with a J, right? Jonathan Davis, right? And other players that I'm not mentioning that I'm sure are taking a leadership role as well. Sark mentioned Andrew Makuba, how he'll be a leader on this team. So, leadership comes in different ways and it looks different and it can work in different ways. And, at first we had Roschon Johnson, who was the de facto leader on this team. But now this team is so talented. You have leadership coming from everywhere on the football field, verbally and non-verbally. And that's really good for this Texas football team heading into the season. Steve Sarkisian on Jonte Cook. I thought Jonte had a really good practice today from the naked eye without looking at the tape. It's good that he mentioned him specifically. As I mentioned earlier, he was described as an alpha on day one, and he's really coming for one of those top 3 spots, and he's certainly coming for that number 1 wide receiver spot, and I would not be surprised at all if he gets it and he's able to build the best rapport with Quinn Ewers over this offseason. Steve Sarkisian talking about Quinn Ewers, I thought Quinn played really confident today and had good command. That's what you want to hear about your veteran signal caller and your leader of this football team at the quarterback position. Steve Sarkisian, once again, first glimpse offensively, we've got some really versatile players. From a receiver standpoint, we were moving guys from outside to inside, playing them in the slot, playing them outside. We moved our running backs around probably more today than we have our first practice of spring ball and try to play to their strengths as well. I think that helps when you've got a really experienced quarterback who understands the offense and can manage some of that stuff at the line of scrimmage, right? So, it kind of sounds like, Quinn Ewers definitely will have more freedom at the line of scrimmage to get Texas in and out of good plays, based on what he's seeing from the defense. And obviously that versatility at every position on the offense just makes Texas so much harder to defend. And we know any Steve Sarkisian offense is really hard to defend, especially with the type of players he's put in it since he's arrived at the 40 acres. Steve Sarkisian says when it comes to Sadir Mitchell, Kendrick Blackshire, and Savion Red, probably all 3 of them are a little heavier than we would like. But he talked about how it's March and, throughout these practices in the heat and DKR and Austin, you're probably bound to lose some weight. So I think Sadir Mitchell is listed at 240 at running back. Kendrick Blackshire is listed at 262 at linebacker. And Sadir Mitchell is listed at 370. at D tackle, 372. Kendrick Blackshaw is listed at 260 at linebacker, and then Savion Red is listed at 240 at running back. So all three players probably a little bit heavier than you would like at those positions right now. But Steve Sarkisian didn't seem overly worried about it because, he knows for the next, 5 months, they're going to be grinding and probably will lose a couple pounds. Steve Sarkisian, I think the theme for this team has been obsession, right? They're obsessed with winning. They're obsessed with everything it takes to be great, right? That's kind of been the tagline for this team. And even on the first day of spring practices, Steve Sarkisian tweeted a few quotes about the word obsession, right? And so he was asked about that at his press conference. And he said, I think being obsessed is you got to love what you do. You're obsessed with what you love to do. You have confidence in what you are doing. You do it in the absence of fear. You're committed to the cause. You're committed to what you're doing. Ultimately, the positive of that is that you're striving towards something and are committed to it. And he didn't say this, but I'll add it, and or are obsessed with it. So I just love Steve Sarkisian, love what he's brought to this program. Obviously, every Texas fan loves what he's brought to the program. But every time he speaks, I listen. And every time he speaks, I learn something. All right. Quick word from our sponsors. And we talk about the Texas baseball team getting a huge win over Air Force in walk-off fashion. All right, today's episode of Locked on Longhorns is brought to you by Bettor Together. Bettor Together is the first cooperative daily fantasy application. Bettor Together offers a familiar experience for existing daily fantasy sports players with a social twist. You can play with a friend/teammate, provides a sense of camaraderie, and enhances the social experience of watching sports and makes you realize that daily fantasy sports is fun alone, but like a lot of other things, it's better when doing it together/with friends. Shows that synergy from working together gives you better chances at winning than going at it alone. The team creates a shared experience. Splitting a contest entry gives the feeling of being connected even when you're apart. It's a way to stay connected with friends when gone are the days of watching sports together in person. Put your group chat to the test and prove yours is the best, providing a sense of community, meeting and working together with fellow fans of your favorite teams. Download Bettor Together now from the App Store and sign up using promo code Locked On for a free $5 entry into any NCAA basketball contest. Remember the code Locked On because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. I'm like a sucker for everything corny, and that ad read was so corny at the end, so I love it, right? I wish that Bettor Together read is on here every day because I'm going to have so much fun reading it. All right. Talking about the Texas baseball team, such an up and down season, especially in terms of the pitching. David Pierce moving over to pitching coach, and at least thus far, the results haven't been great in terms of that. And Texas is now 12-8 on the season. Coming into the game, they were 11-8, and really just some tough losses, right? You had the really good series against Cal Poly, but then you had the 4-game losing streak. Especially against 3 SEC teams who you'll be matching up with a lot in the future, and then winning the series against Texas Tech, but then coming back and losing the series to Washington, right? So it's just been up and down. And, Texas was looking yesterday like they were going to have another bad loss. And, all the fans were going to go into a panic about the Texas baseball team and scream how we need to fire David Pierce and how David Pierce has not lived up to the billing of being a coach or manager for the Texas baseball team and everything that comes with. But winning solves everything. And now every Texas baseball fan is happy with that. I wouldn't say every Texas baseball fan, because I saw some fans on Twitter saying we used to not have to win dog fights against Air Force. So we're just now in the social media era where nobody's going to be 100% happy. But, right, how Texas fans felt going into the ninth inning and how they feel now about the baseball team, completely different. It's true. Winning really cures everything, right? So you're now 12-8 on the season after beating Air Force 6-5, walking it off in extra innings. The theme that has haunted this Texas baseball team continued. They are letting the other team jump out to early leads and then forcing their offense to play from behind, putting extra pressure on their bats, right, to come back, right, and overcome bad pitching to start the game. So when you look at it, the Texas baseball team in the first inning allowed 2 runs on 2 hits and 3 walks in the first inning, but the Longhorns were thankfully able to get a double play on a hard hit liner to second base. The runner at second took off prematurely, thinking that it was going to, land in the dirt or, land in the ground, I guess, over the second baseman's head. And so then you got the double play at second base because he took off, even though it was a caught ball. So that's an inning where you could have given up 4 or 5 runs. You were lucky to get out of it with 2 with the double play. Texas brought the small ball magic back in the bottom of the first after Jared Thomas doubled. He was moved over twice, once on a fly ball and then once on a ground out to score, cutting the deficit to 2-1. Texas once again scoring another run without a base hit. They've been really good at it. Really good at that over the last week and a half or so. Air Force hit an RBI single in the second inning to go up 3-1, but the Longhorns turned another double play to leave it there. So really good defense in the first 2 innings with 2 double plays, even though the first one kind of came on a base running error. But you can't really blame him with how hard the ball was hit, right? Over taking off from second base. Jared Thomas hit another double in the second, driving in a run to cut the deficit to 3-2. Air Force would increase the lead to 4-2 on an unearned run in the 6th, but Texas chipped away a little bit with an RBI grounder in the 7th to make the score 4-3, right? Keeping it close. In the top of the 9th, Air Force scored on an RBI single to increase the lead to 5-3. So now you're 3 outs away from, like I said, we have all the respect in the world for Air Force, but that would have been a bad loss at home to that baseball team, right? After an RBI single, no, not an RBI single, excuse me. After a single, Jalen Flores tattooed, that's a home run, right? Tattooed a hanging slider to tie the game at 5-5 in the bottom of the 9th. And in the 10th, with the bases loaded, D. Kennedy got his first RBI of his career to walk it off for the Texas Longhorns. So what was looking like a bad loss quickly in about 30 minutes turned into a huge win for the Texas baseball team. And it's the type of win that can propel you, with a lot of momentum, and they can really start to hit on all cylinders in terms of the defense, pitching, and, base running, fielding, whatever, right? All of the components of baseball. So these are the type of games, these are the type of victories, these are the type of games where you show resilience. And it really, gives you that momentum, and we can look back, right? If this Texas baseball team does anything special or magical this season, we can look back and say this game, right, where they walked it off against Air Force in a game they were down 5-3 in the 9th inning, could be the game, or could be the turning point for this Texas baseball team through the rest of the season. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.